In 2024, there were two main debates that really heated up in the community this year: who and what Golden Freddy is, and who the Crying Child is. Regarding the latter, many theories have been proposed over the years, ranging from being Michael Afton, Evan, Garrett from the movie, and even Cassidy. Recently, a new theory has taken the spotlight: Dave, a name popularized by Hyperjoy's fantastic video on the logbook, which you should check out by the way. However, I believe something very different: that we actually known the Crying Child's real name since 2015, and that Scott was trying to lead us to it in the most unlikely of places: Midnight Motorist. I believe Midnight Motorist, the most unsolved minigame in the series, is the key to solving the identity of the Crying Child. Now, Scott was trying to clarify this in its final game, so in a way, consider this video both a Crying Child and that Midnight Motorist theory. Also, before we start, remember, if you enjoyed this video, like it down below and maybe subscribe if you want more. Now, let's not waste too much time and set the context and stage for Midnight Motorist. Firstly, let's get a big clarifier out of the way. This is not an Afton Midnight Motorist theory, and I do not believe FLAF Freddy's confirms it at all. To speed past the reasoning, it's an early demo game, and much will change in the final launch, so let's wait for the final game to make judgments instead of coming to rash conclusions too early on. Moreover, the same card that implies Afton is the Midnight Motorist also has a dice showing 87, which can be used to support the theory that Midnight Motorist is set in 1987. This doesn't make too much sense with Afton Midnight Motorist 2, so you can't have both, but you also can't pick and choose. So I currently believe it's just a fan reference. There is also just simply too much against Afton being the yellow guy for me to believe this game does a 180 and what's been hinted at for many years now since FNaF 6. All that is to say is that I find it very unlikely that Afton is the yellow guy, and we should wait for the full release of FLAF Freddy's before making any full judgments. But with that out of the way, let's actually set the foundation. Most importantly, we know that this minigame has to be about an Afton victim, because it's a Lore Keeper minigame. The Lore Keeper ending is tied to the gravestones of the MCI kids and the puppet, as we see here. Also, Security Puppet and Fury Maze both align with a gravestone on the hill, Charlie and Susie respectively. So, since Midnight Motorist is also required for the Lore Keeper ending, it stands to reason that it too is also about an Afton victim tied to the gravestones. This idea is even further supported by later content. Look at Ultimate Cutscene Night, where they tortured cutscenes represent William and his victims. These cutscenes also tied to the Gravestone Hill, as you can see here in the final cutscene. Most importantly though, one of the cutscenes directly references Midnight Motorist. Listen to this excerpt.
Look at those strings! Those long, beautiful strings. He'll be mine by the end of the day. I just know it. I told him to come over later. That should be enough. And if he doesn't show up, I'll just go to his house. And if he doesn't open the door, I'll just find a window. Chimney's always an option. Or I could set the house on fire and wait for him to run out. Then he could run into my arms. There is only one thing that could possibly go wrong.
This description perfectly matches Midnight Motorist: someone stalking a victim, finding the window, and taking him, albeit with some added absurdity. Consider too that this cutscene is also doing at the puppet boy, linking this victim to the puppet in some way. If Midnight Motorist is the night Charlie died, it further strengthens this connection, or just generally connects the kid to the puppet, aka Charlie. But the final detail that solidifies this point is found in Help Wanted Curse the Dreadbear, where you can see Glitchtrap, a non-spring suit version of Spring Bonnie, dancing outside the Midnight Motorist house as if he was the one who lured the child out. These elements together make it abundantly clear that Midnight Motorist is about a victim of Afton, where William uses Spring Bonnie to take the child. And yeah, I know that was a lot, but it is important to establish this foundation, as Midnight Motorist being about an Afton victim tied to the Lore Keeper gravestones will be very important later. So with that foundation in place, we can now continue. So the way I've decided to handle this part of the video is that we will effectively go over each aspect of Midnight Motorist, get the answers, and then at the end, make a narrative and conclusion from it. Let's start with arguably the most important question of the minigame. Who is the motorist? Who is Yellow Guy? So who do I believe Yellow Guy to be? Well, the answer I propose is... drumroll please... Henry! and that's for several reasons. First off, on a basic level, it just kind of makes sense. This is Henry's introductory game. In the game, meant to tie up loose ends, properly connecting Henry to the past game's events and giving him more character just makes sense there, especially given his daughter is the subject of an entire minigame. But there is more direct evidence. For example, yellow is the complementary color to purple. In other words, it's the opposite. This would fit Henry, and we do know Scott uses color symbolism in the series since FNaF 2 and even the recent games like Princess Quest, so the color symbology does matter and is evidence. This is even boosted by the fact that the hex code of Yellow Man's sprite and text has 223, and like colors, hex codes have always been relevant since FNaF 4. Also, refer to the Silverize, whose original cover had the exact same aesthetic background as FNaF 4, and in the Silverize, Charlie returns to Henry's house, which is off a highway in a clearing within a forest behind her house that Henry warned her not to run into and get lost in when she was younger. Does this not sound very familiar? This perfectly matches Midnight Motorist to a T, a house off a highway in a forest clearing. But as to why Henry would drive a purple car, it's likely for two reasons. Meta-wise, it's a red herring and a plot twist. Scott wants us to think it's William by the car, but when we see it's actually orange, we realize that it's not actually William. In universe, it just may be a company car. And anyway, William's car in FNaF 4 outside his house seems to be blue, and in the movie, it's a dark blue or black. It's only really purple and Save Him, so it's not much of an indicator on it being William when you actually think about it. Now, with the motors out of the way, who's that made the couch potato? The answer is also quite simple. It's Miss Emily. This identity is based on one single detail, the one characterization of Miss Emily we get in the novels, that she was a loving and caring mother, and Henry's son was her favorite, known as Mama's Boy. It makes sense then that she'll be the one to defend Henry's son from a drunken Henry. And this does lead to the next question, who is the runaway? And to no surprise to those who read the novels, the answer is clearly Sammy Emily. In case you haven't read the novels, Henry has two kids, Charlie and Sammy Emily. So if Yellow Man is Henry and the runaway is a male, the runaway would be Sammy, Henry's other son. Likewise, who made the footprints is also a clear answer. As we established, spring body was used, so it's William in the spring bodysuit luring Sammy. Maybe even in a non-spring suit version, as Help Wanted Plus shows does exist with Glitch Strap. With that, I answered some of the big and obvious questions, but what of the other ones, like the mound? Well, I believe it's a rabbit hole. Yes, a rabbit hole. Refer back to Fury Maze for a moment, where a spring body rabbit comes out of the ground stalking the girl that seems to be Susie. I believe it's just that. I suspect that William is taking Sammy there to the mound, pretending he's the yellow rabbit in a hole, gaining Sammy's trust gradually and repeatedly. This isn't an act his nature to do, as he tends to be the yellow rabbit to gain the kid's trust in the novels and the movies. It is also possible that this hole was a proto-cislocation bunker, which we know had tunnels connected to Fredbear's other locations. This system likely led to the bunker later, being an early version of the tunnels. And yes, I do understand that this answer is a bit out there compared to the more popular theory of it being a grave, but when you think about it, nothing in the game actually implies it's a grave. In fact, it's so far away from the house, it doesn't make sense that if someone died, they would bury them so far away in some random field. So in general, I just believe it makes more sense if it's an underground system compared to being a grave or an animatron. But with the mound out of the way, what did Henry mean when he said Sammy went to that place again? Well, I believe the answer here is also very clear. That place refers to the mound, where somebody takes Sammy and deceives him. Henry is clearly referring to the mound when he says that place. Otherwise, why show the mound as a secret area to begin with? It doesn't make sense for Scott to code this secret area into the map that's directly north of the house and the footprints if it wasn't meant to be the same area he's referring to. It doesn't make sense otherwise. And also, Henry's line does indicate where Sammy had been going, due to William luring him over time. If William had been luring Sammy, deceiving him and gaining his trust as the Yellow Rabbit before taking him, it actually does explain Midnight Motorist near perfectly. It explains why the minigames is framed as if what we're seeing is something that had happened before, but now something is different. Something worse has happened. This time, Sammy isn't coming home. That generally goes over the more major questions and aspects of Midnight Motorist, but there are two more smaller yet still important questions. Firstly, when does Midnight Motorist take place? Well, I believe both Security Puppet and Midnight Motorist take place in 1982. Yes, 1982. This does make sense, given that in the novels, Charlie was kidnapped at Fredbear's during Halloween of 1982 and was killed seemingly the same year. And when you take into account that there is evidence that Charlie died during Halloween in the games, just like the novels, it becomes less likely that the date is different from the novels to the games. And for those who will ask, the reason her gravestone says 1983 in the floor closet is because that's the year she was presumed dead. They never actually found her body, if you remember. And it is normal in real life for missing persons to have their gravestones be the date that they were presumed dead, rather than the date they went missing. So this is normal. Even then, Charlie dying in 1982 makes even more sense when you consider that the Property of Figures Diner teaser for FNaF 4 had 82 in its source code. Considering Scott also began writing the surprise during FNaF 3 and 4's development, where 1982 first came from, and since the surprise shares familiar elements with the games, it becomes plausible that Charlie instead of happening in 1982 in the games, and by extension, so did the kidnapping of Sammy and Emily. Though some may object to this, referencing how in Type 1 or 2, when you input 1983 in the private room, you get the puppet memory plush, implying potentially she died the same year. But I don't believe this implies she must have died that year. You remember that FNaF 4 took place in 1983, and that is when the puppet possessed the plush bear and gave life to the rest of the MCI kids in Give Gives Give Life. The code then relates to the events of that year that inspired the experiments that William made. This would also suggest that since the puppet plush was found in that private room, the puppet would then be connected or was behind the FNaF 4 nightmares, which again are based on what happened in 1983. For on that subject though, check out these two videos respectively here. The next but last question, however, is, does Midnight Motorist take place after Charlie's death? And the answer really is just, maybe? Nothing truly indicates it besides the ring and the assumption of being Afton, but Rain though is arguably just a reused asset, and Rain often indicates something bad is happening like in Follow Me. Contrary to popular belief, Later That Night does not prove it comes after Charlie's death, as it can more easily refer to the first part of the minigame, the actual Midnight Motorist, with Later That Night being the second part to that minigame. Later That Night after Midnight Motorist, the first part of the minigame, with Later That Night being, again, the second part. This point doesn't really affect this theory all too much, but I do find this more increasingly likely, especially since it seems Henry is already going on a downward spiral by the time the minigame happens. A few questions arise from this interpretation, mainly revolving around why. Why does William do this? And why is Scott showing us this? What is it meant to reveal? What is the point in showing that Henry's kid was taken by William sometime after Charlie was killed? What exactly is Scott clarifying with a minigame so early in the timeline? To firstly answer why Afton is doing this, we have to look to the novel trilogy, where it depicts William's crimes against Henry as personal. He has a borderline obsession and worship with Henry, and he's envious of what Henry has, and wants to be better than him. Even though William has Elizabeth and Michael in the games, at least one more child compared to the novel counterpart, he still murders Charlie. It's then reasonable to think that even after killing Charlie, William, seeing as better Henry's family was, decided to take Henry's last child away by deceiving and kidnapping Sammy while in his pink body costume. And as for why Scott is showing this, to me, there's only one clear answer that accounts for everything. It's showing us who Golden Freddy, the fifth victim, really is. Sammy Emily, the brother of Charlie. And if you've seen the previous theories, Golden Freddy is the Crying Child of FNaF 4, making the Crying Child Henry's son? Yeah, I would bet right now you're probably slamming on your keyboards, typing up a storm how the Crying Child has to be Afton's son, and that he's Michael's brother. And I would agree, you're right. But why do you think it'd be Afton's son and Henry's at the same time? Do you remember how I said that William only kidnapped him? He didn't kill him, at least, not at first. Wait, isn't that familiar?
First I killed your brother. Now I killed you. Symmetry, my friend.
Yup, we're starting off strong with the movie. And as you can tell, there is a precedent for William being a kidnapper. William literally crossed state lines just to kidnap Garrett from the Schmidts. And not only did he do this in the movie, he did it in the novels, taking Charlie for killing her in 1982. Even in Tales of the Pizzaplex, William kidnaps a kid named Roy sometime in the mid-late 90s, and doesn't kill him soon after at all. It was a long-term operation. He kept Roy down there for over 10 years by the time the story begins. With just those examples, I can make the argument that if William is consistently characterized as a serial killer who kidnaps children for personal or scientific reasons, why shouldn't it then apply to the actual game's timeline with someone else? But all the evidence really just shows is that it is in William's character to kidnap a kid, especially if it's personal, like with the Emilies or the Schmidts. But the real question is there anything that connects Sammy to the Crying Child that would by extension imply that he was kidnapped? You'll be surprised that there is. Let's start with a weaker point. Let's look at designs. Here's the Crying Child's official design paired with his minigame counterpart, a young boy with brown hair and brown eyes. Let's compare it to Charlie. This is her design according to the novels and the Freddy files. Brown hair, brown eyes, matching very well, if not exactly. Twins almost. Now I will admit out the bat that while this point is okay, it does weaken since even though the Crying Child matches novel Henry in the encyclopedia looks entirely unrelated, and even though the Crying Child doesn't match genetically with the Aftons, it does generally weaken the argument. So regardless of that, while he does look like he could be Charlie's twin, what in the games directly connects him to being Charlie's brother or Sammy? Well, first, to understand these deeper points I will go into, we have to first establish the identity of Plush Bear and Golden Freddy, which I do more so in my first theory video. But to give a summary, the Plush Bear is not William Afton, but rather Charlie the puppet. There are several reasons for this claim. Said reasons include, but not limited to, the Plush Bear being depicted as explicitly possessed in the games and also having a possession marker, and also labeled as possessed in merch. There was also the grandfather's clock symbology with Plush Bear, connecting him to the puppet. Also with Plush Bear's final line implying that he makes the Crying Child animatronic, also implies that he's the puppet, given what we see in FNaF 2. Even Help Wanted 2 implies that the Plush Bear is the puppet, due to 1983 giving me the puppet Millie plush in the private room, the same room the Plush Bear was in, clarifying his identity. And in regards to Golden Freddy, I can confidently say again that he is the Crying Child. This is implied throughout 4 and onward. This identity is mainly told to us by its various parallels, such as when Fredbear and Friends parallels the Bite 83, or when that same bite also parallels Happiest Day. In nearly every single parallel the Crying Child is in, he's in Fredbear's position, and the Crying Child being in Fredbear was also seemingly confirmed in the week before, where Ralph can hear a recording of the Bite 83 and the Crying Child's death, and even after it ends, he can still hear his crying come from Fredbear before being chomped, saying directly that the Crying Child is Golden Freddy. And also, wasn't too relevant, note how the Crying Child is the only Golden Freddy in the week before, no one else, just him, no casting. Almost as if there's only one Golden Freddy spirit, the Crying Child, saying how Golden Freddy's always a male spirit in each timeline like the novels and the movie. But with that pot shot out of the way, having these two identities in mind is very important, since if we go with the Plush being the puppet and the Crying Child's Golden Freddy, we can start pointing out deeper connections people don't pay mind to. Throughout the original 3 games, Golden Freddy and the puppet were parallels or effectively reflections of each other. They share similar abilities like teleportation, hallucinations, going transparent, and so on. Their deaths are also more unique, with Take Cake and Give Gives Give Life treating both children in a unique way. Even instead of minigame, they're connected. Give Gives Give Life has the puppet not give a mask to the Golden Freddy child, indicating they're special. That same minigame also parallels Happiest Day with the mask. And we can't forget that Happiest Day also has the puppet setting up this minigame to free the Golden Freddy spirit, alluding not only is his child special, but that the puppet has a unique bond to them because the puppet orchestrated Happiest Day just for this child. So as you can see, Golden Freddy and the puppet are uniquely linked and forwards to one another, similar to Jake and Andrew in the Stitch Rape Stingers. And nobody's really taken the time to explore these connections, so even if I end up wrong, I do hope this has encouraged some thought. What are my thoughts? Well, if the Crying Child is Golden Freddy and Charlie's twin brother Sammy, it explains why Golden Freddy and the puppet reflected one another, why Puppet and Golden Freddy share similar qualities like teleportation, induced hallucinations, transparency, etc., and why they both seem to utilize terms like it's me and it's him. It also explains why the Golden Freddy child and the puppet child are singled out and unique, but also bonded together. They are literal reflections, 2 halves of the same coin. If you think about it, this theory could explain old lingering details in the series. Let's start with something familiar from FNaF 3. Do you remember the habits and minigames I've spoken about before, how they all in some way connect to FNaF 4 as the Crying Child's memories? Well, I want you to remember this connection, this crying puppet. Referencing again my first video, these are the Crying Child's memories. They represent the Crying Child's past, things he's seen and witnessed. That means this crying puppet is the Crying Child's memory of that moment in the Night 6 minigame when he dies. This would be a problem because, as we referenced before, this was a major piece of evidence that the Crying Child was the puppet before FNaF 6, but we know now he can't be the puppet. Yet this is what it implies. It's saying the Crying Child is the puppet, but again, he can't be. In my original Golden Freddy video, I had proposed a solution to this issue, but now I want to take it to its full extent. If the Crying Child is not the puppet, but he's represented by the puppet as if he is the puppet but literally isn't, that makes the Crying Child the puppet's reflection. In other words, her twin. Otherwise, why have the Crying Child be reflected and replaced by the puppet doing the exact same thing he did in his memory? It's like they're the same, but they're not. Don't Salute 2 that the Crying Child's design perfectly reflects and matches the puppet. They are also the only known living, constantly crying children in the original games. So when you reaccount that the Crying Child parallels the puppet, and if he's Golden Freddy, he reflects the puppet throughout the games, it becomes clear. They are the same, but not. Two halves of the same coin. Before we move on any further, if my voice sounds different throughout the video sometimes, it's because when I record these longer videos, it's a bit harsher on my voice, so if I sound more quiet or louder at times, it's because of that. I hope it doesn't affect the quality too much though. But let's move on. Taking in mind the previous points I just made, also considering the Survivors came out just months later the same year as FNaF 4, and its cover had the exact same aesthetic background as FNaF 4. And Scott also said it shares familiar elements. It's reasonable then that this actually was a shared element. And yes, while the Survivors was not meant to solve the games nor answer for them, those familiar elements can be found. And what does the Survivors say? Charlie marries a twin brother Sammy being kidnapped by William in 1982 at Fredbear's. And while the later truth would be that she was actually the one taken, it is completely possible to see Scott doing a reverse in the games, with Sammy actually being the one taken by William. This idea could also be contextualized to save him minigame in a way that makes sense, preventing from being a reckless and unneeded retcon. Instead of referring to the child outside, it would be in reference to her brother Sammy. The reason for this claim is actually pretty simple. Consider that the minigames of FNaF 2 were always about the puppet trying to help the children, with save them meaning the puppet saying to Freddy, save them, the children, and give gifts of life, she's giving life and helping the children. It would then make sense that save him is not entirely retcon, but instead the puppet telling themselves to save a him, the Crying Child. This would fit into the concept of a shared memory, which reminds me, we may even shown that the Crying Child has a shared memory of Take Cake despite not literally being there. Let's once more return to FNaF 3 for just a moment. Do you remember Shadow Bunny's glitch minigame? I go over it briefly in my first video. What's crucial to this theory in regards to this minigame though is that as RxQ, you start at stage 01 and glitch through time until you find a random box, reminiscent of stage 01 and Take Cake to the children, with a child outside. Notably, this child is the only one that's depicted as dark. I think this represents Charlie's death at Fredbear's, which I believe the dark soul outside the box, like in Take Cake, in front of a football background, is supposed to convey. William started at stage 01 of the MCI, but ended up at the real stage 01, stage 01 of the murders. And yes, before anyone tells me, I know that kid in the minigame is Jeremy's soul, but I'm saying it represents Charlie in the memory, taking her place despite not literally being her. The same way Fritz represents the Crying Child in his memory of stage 01. The Crying Child here having a memory of this event, despite not literally being there, would be an early example of a shared memory in FNaF, which we do see in later media like the books. As a more minor but still interesting note, FNaF World, a game centered around the Crying Child and Charlie, has Update 2 released on May 13th, Sammy and Charlie's birthday in the novels. Considering too that FNaF World's clock storyline is about the Crying Child and the puppet, with the latter one to guide the Crying Child to his happiest day, Update 2's teasers also has a secret message in the source code, it's saying he put the pieces back together. Considering the ties between Happiest Day, the clocks, and Happiest Day being birthday theme, it makes the day potentially intentional, even if it's dubious. Regardless of that point about FNaF World, if you look deeper into this theory, you can even find some interesting symbology to consider. As I briefly referenced earlier, it's implied Charlie died on Halloween 82, like the novels. FNaF 6 also had the Spookfest poster, effectively Fall Fest before Fall Fest. And in Top 101, we have Curse of Dreadbear showing the Midnight Motorist house overseeing Fall Fest, as if Midnight Motorist is somewhat related to a Fall Fest or Spookfest. If this is true, Charlie likely died on a Fall Fest night, and Midnight Motorist sometime after. If you combine this with the evidence from the same Curse of Dreadbear that FNaF 4 was during Halloween, and that the bully's mask were Halloween masks, and with everyone going to the Crying Child's party despite not being his friend, it seems that the party may have should have just been on Halloween, exactly a year from Charlie's death. That would mean the birthday William chose for Sammy was the night he killed his sister. His new Afton identity is associated with Halloween, and ironically, he dies on the anniversary of his sister's death, making things all too ironic. He lost his sister Halloween of 82, losing his identity shortly after, and he lost his life and new identity Halloween of 83, becoming Golden Freddy. And also, if you believe that Midnight Motorist is the night Charlie died, this symbology is even stronger, as Halloween movie night Sammy was taken by William and given his new identity, making things even more ironic. With all the main evidence out of the way, we can now move on to the final part, but before we do that, I have to answer a common objection. That being, how could William kidnap Sammy, raise him, and get away with it? Especially if Sammy is able to walk around outside, how has Henry not noticed his child walking around? The answer here lies in William's manipulation and ability to gaslight. Even in real life, kidnappers have lived close to the victims' families without even being caught, and William, being a master deceiver, could easily pull this off, especially given he's done it before with kids like Rory. William is a master of manipulation and gaslighting, as we see him do with Rory in Didophobia. And as for Henry, after Charlie's death in the novels, he spirals into grief and isolates himself in his work. If this applies to the games, Henry would have been too consumed by his loss to notice Sammy with William, especially if Afton covered his tracks. It is also reasonable to argue that, like the novels, after the MCI curse in 1983 in the games, Henry would have left town, or maybe even convicted, as the FNaF 1 newspapers imply someone was. And from out of the picture, nobody would be around to question William, and given William's ability to gaslight as shown in Didophobia, it wouldn't be hard for him to do at all. William likely saw how much better Henry's family was and wanted to destroy it, so first he killed Charlie, but then he kidnapped Sammy in his sweet bodysuit, raised him as his own, and passed him off as his adopted child. This would have devastated Henry's family even further, especially Sammy's mother who favored him, deepening Henry's suffering. But when he uses Henry's suit first in the MCI, Henry gets framed for murder. This pattern does align with William's motives in the novels, breaking Henry's family to satisfy his jealousy and obsession. As for Michael, Sammy would just seem like an adopted brother, and if he ever questioned it, well, we see how William disciplines his kids, haven't we? And as for a final note, Plushbear could somewhat parallel Theodore, a plush built by Henry with built-in voices that repeat, Plushbear's being tomorrow is another day, but this time his sister possessed it and used it to communicate, both characters having a similar plush toy made by their fathers that gets possessed. I think this is very interesting to keep in mind, but regardless of that, let's move on to the final part. In this final part, I want to analyze the overall narrative we built here, as I believe this theory ties together a lot of loose threads across the games and connects all the aspects of Golden Freddy theory together, with this having a focus on the connection between the Crying Child and the puppet. And as theorized in my original Golden Freddy video, the Crying Child can be connected to the fifth missing child, a victim of William Afton, being revived by the puppet during the MCI and later protected by her throughout FNaF 4. And after by 83, he was forced to become Golden Freddy, and the puppet's actions throughout the series show she has a special goal to free Golden Freddy and put him back together. And all these connections become more clear and complete when you consider the possibility that they're potentially siblings. In FNaF 4, for example, the puppet's behavior makes more sense when you view her as having a personal sibling connection to the Crying Child. She revives him during the MCI because of this bond. Being her brother, she wants to save him the most. Even the FNaF movie plays in this idea of sibling connections, as Mike feels closer to Garrett when at the pizzeria despite not even being twins. The puppet's protective actions towards the Crying Child, both FNaF 4 and Happiest Day, it shows a unique link between them that can be explained by them being twins. There's also ties into why the puppet and Golden Freddy reflect each other across the games. They share a connection that goes beyond what we see with just the other spirits. They are siblings. They are little family. But there is more to the story. William Afton's jealousy of Henry caused him to go farther than just killing Charlie. He had to destroy Henry's family entirely. So he used his old spring bodysuit and lured Sammy into trusting him before kidnapping him. But after the kidnapping, William raised him as his own, putting a new identity for him with a different name and birthday. However, it was more than a mere act of manipulation. It was William erasing Sammy's identity as Henry's son, the ultimate insult to Henry, showing Afton's superiority to him. Afton had always valued control over others above all, and at some point, William had realized that Charlie's spirit was still on as the puppet and might be trying to reach out to the Crying Child, Sammy. William then gave the plush spear to Sammy, placing it in Sammy's room to monitor him. The plush was likely set up to observe the Crying Child, Sammy, and detect any interference from Charlie, while also conducting potential experiments. Despite this, seeing Sammy as a risk, William decided to eliminate him. During the MCI, he killed Sammy. Not just because Sammy wasn't really his child, but because he was loose in. By stuffing him like the other kids, with the intention of becoming an animatronic like them, it remakes him in his image, his family, his perfect family. He would have full control over Sammy like the other children. The puppet, however, saved him, possessing his plush bear toy, her soul attached to Sammy. She tried to protect him, but it wasn't enough. The bite occurred, and in the end, she turned him into Golden Freddy, while William, inspired by his son's revival, it fueled his motivations into the supernatural. William then took Plush Bear and moved it to his apartment for not only study, but to use it in his future experiments. And that's the theory. A longer one too since my original video. I hope it was understandable and made you think Will could be the real answer to the Crying Child's identity. It was fun to make this and propose an unorthodox idea. And while I am decently confident in this theory, I could definitely see myself being wrong here, with Crying Child and Charlie simply just being very close friends, the children of the two owners. However, I believe this theory does explain all the evidence surrounding Crying Child not being Afton's kid. And also, in a recent stream by TT Dreads, the Unwritten Truth explains the idea that in FNaF 4, the sister's room was meant to belong to the puppet, the sister to the Crying Child. So check that stream out if you want to hear that, or just all the interesting ideas and theories they talk about. It was a great stream, and both of them, in fact actually everyone on that stream, are very good creators. So if you haven't seen them for some reason, do check them out. Regardless, I know many questions still do remain, such as the question of casting who they are if the Crying Child is the only Golden Freddy. This question generally ties to a larger issue regarding the logbook, begging the question of who's communicating in there, and if Evan or Dave are correct solutions to the Foxy Grid. And while I do have my own thoughts on that, especially the names, this theory does work with any name for the Crying Child, as William would have given Sammy a new name after he took him for obvious reasons, so he can be Dave, Evan, or Cassidy, and still be Sammy deep down. Also, going forward, I will commonly refer to the Crying Child as Sammy, since that feels like it's a canonical name to me, just like Greek creators like Gibby refer to him as Dave in their videos. And I know I'm a million times smaller, but please watch his content, it's great, especially the video on Tails here. Anyway, I'd rather call him a name than keep calling him the Crying Child or Bite Victim every single time. A name just makes it more easier, you know? But my time is done. What do you guys think? Do you think it's possible the Crying Child isn't Afton's child? If so, is he Henry's? What identity do you believe fits him best? What name just sounds better to you? What do you prefer just on a name? All that said, I think we're done here. That means, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click that like button down below, and subscribe if you want more from me. It's fun being the guy with orthodox theories. Thank you all for watching, and see ya next time.